Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button.
Blood slowly dripped from the mouth of Akumo Chunin as he struggled to keep himself alive. He was pinned to a wall of a tower by several kunai. He tried to scream for help but found he couldn't, probably because of the wound he had received earlier. He looked up at his attackers. Each one was dressed in a black robe with red clouds on it and straw hats with spike-shaped bells dangling from the rim of the hat. The one on the right was a huge man who started walking towards him and pulled out that sword off his back, the sword that had shredded most of the men on guard duty with him, and pointed it at his face. Ha! One left, can I him, Itachi-san? The large man asked with a shark-like grin. There is no need, Kisame-san, you caved his throat in during the fight, he won't blab. Itachi said with his normally calm face. Ah, but he can still write. Kisame grinned as he swung his sword and ripped off the Kumo Chunin's hands. The Chunin's eyes widened in pain as he stared at the two bloody stubs that used to be his hands. Hey, he had a point, yeah. The third member of their team said with a smirk. The shark man hefted his sword the Samahata onto his shoulder and looked out towards the city of Kumogakure. Hey, three Jinchuriki in one place, this could get very interesting. Hey Deidara-san, which ones are we hunting again? The Scourge of Kirigakure asked with his shark-like grin. The Jinchuriki of the Kyubi, the Gobi and the Nibi. Hey, that's quite a chore list. Kisame grinned, the anticipation of the upcoming fight making him shake in excitement. The Nibi might not be much of a problem, but Deidara started. The other two might be more of a problem, yeah. Hey, do I sense cowardice? Kisame asked. Deidara glared at Kisame. Deidara-san does have a point, Itachi said. A gentle breeze blew through his hair as he stared out at the city. If the Jinchuriki of the Kyubi and the Gobi become comrades or friends, it could become problematic. If that happens, we nab the Gobi and the Kyubi when they're not together, that's simple. Now when do we strike? Kisame asked. After the Chunin exam, when our targets are recovering from their previous fights at the final exam, that is when we strike. Now have you left the clues? Itachi asked as he turned towards Kisame. Yeah, I scattered clothing and such from a local bandit gang around and a couple of corpses from the group that tried to mug us on the way here. Kisame said. Good, now let's go. And with that said, the three nuke nins disappeared into the night. A Kumogakure training ground. Sasuke Uchiha continued to punch the boulder in front of him, imagining each time that it was either Naruto or Itachi. Sweat streamed down his brow, his fist sore and covered in his own blood. He stopped pounding the boulder to dust and instead began kicking it. It was around 8 p.m. and it was a beautiful night with the stars out in full glow. I have to get stronger, to avenge them and to both of them. Sasuke thought angrily as images of Naruto and Itachi flooded his mind, each one making him more angry than the last. So this is the guy Orochimaru-sama wants, right? A husky voice said from the shadows, a small trail of smoke coming from the cigarette in his mouth. He was talking quiet enough not to be heard by Sasuke. Oh Kami, is he hot? He makes me just want to rip of his clothes and ride, came the voice of a girl next to the first person. Another voice cut her off, the voice of noble and arrogant sounding person. For Kami's sake, please refrain from filling our heads with such perverted filth. Those books are poison to your mind and the author is a moron. Oh shut up Kazoku Tem, Jiraiya-san is amazing and you're just a pampered little brat. Kazoku Kinzoku growled with anger. Kazoku was very tall for his age, standing at about 6'3" at 13. He wore a black hakama and a gray jinbauri with the kanji for metal on the back of it and black ninja sandals. His black hair was in dreadlocks that he kept all together in a ponytail except for one that hung over the left side of his face. His eyes were a dark gray color and an Odo headband tied around his forehead. His features were of someone born with a strong body and high cheekbones. A katana in a gray sheath hung from his belt. Hey, well Akiko, at least I'm not some whore, how can't wait to lose her virginity. Akiko glared at him and let's just say if looks could, Kazoku would be dead 5 times over. She was a very pretty girl with red hair tied up in a loose ponytail. Her eyes were a dark green with a few flecks of red. She wore a red two-piece bikini with yellow flame marks on it and a pair of yellow shorts, her Odo headband tied around her waist and the basic ninja gear. Both of you knock it off before I add you to my collection. The last member off their squad threatened. Hi, Iwato-san, Akiko said, turning her head away from Kazoku. Kazoku growled but kept his mouth shut. Iwato was a thin man that was very pale. He wore a black vest with nothing but a fishnet shirt under it that showed you his lanky physique. His hair was a pitch black that he had hanging over the right side of his face. It was greasy and looked like he never washed it. His pants were a pair of tattered black jeans with the face of a skull on the left leg acting as a knee guard. They looked like they had seen some abuse. Iwato wore his headband around his left arm. On his back was a huge black object that could only be described as a coffin. It had metal outlines that held the object in place and making it very sturdy. On the front of it was a real skeleton engraved into it, its skull cracked on the right side. Now let's get this over with. Iwato stood from where he was hiding and jumped down about 3 yards away from Sasuke with the other two landing behind him. Uchiha Sasuke, right? Iwato asked with a devilish grin plastered on his face. Sasuke glared as he pulled a kunai free from its holster. What do you want? Iwato didn't say anything but continued to grin as he pulled the coffin off of his back and slammed it on the ground next to himself. Iwato charged at him with his arms behind him, a kunai in each hand. Sasuke jumped away from the charging Odo shinobi. Sasuke's eyes widened as he felt a presence behind him. Glancing over his shoulder he saw Kazoku. Flipping around, Sasuke slammed his fist towards the other enemy ninja, but just as his fist was an inch from his body, several metal spikes shot out of his body and captured his fist. Sasuke activated the Chidori without hand signs and broke free and tried to slam the electric attack into his chest, but Kazoku disappeared. Sasuke landed on the ground. What was that? He asked. Kazoku stood in front of him and took his jinbaori off and then the top part of his hakama, revealing his bare-muscled chest. That was my Kekkei Genkai, the Kinzoku Myakuhaku, one which allows me to control any metal in my body, very similar to my old sensei's Kekkei Genkai, only he used bones. Take a guess who that was. However, since the normal human doesn't have much metal alloy in the body, I have come up with a simple solution. He then pulled a kunai from his pocket and stabbed his arm. Sasuke thought he was crazy until he saw that the kunai started sinking into his body. Kazoku gritted his teeth but kept a confident smirk the whole time. Kumogakure. So what do you guys want to do? Naruto asked as he, Kankuro and Tamari walked down a street. Let's go eat. Kankuro shouted. Tamari walked up to Naruto and hooked her arm around his. Let's go to a place with karaoke. Tamari said. Naruto looked around the street and pointed at a big sign that said, Maji's all-you-can-eat buffet. And below that it said, Karako night, every night we're open. That's perfect. Naruto said. The group entered the restaurant. It was pretty big with 2 stories. The top floor was for those who wanted to eat and sing karaoke, and the bottom was for those who just wanted to eat. The place was very nice and clean. It was modern looking with a dash of old world Japanese look. A waitress walked up to them and smiled. She was very pretty with blue hair up in a loose bun, black eyes and a very nice body. She was dressed in a blue kimono with the word, Maji's, printed in big yellow letters on the front. Welcome to Maji's, I'm Yuki and I'll be your waitress. Would you like the karaoke floor or the bottom floor? She asked. Karaoke floor please. Tamari said. As the group ascended the stairs they noticed someone was just getting on the karaoke machine. Looking closer they saw that it was the Hyuga that had filled in for Shikamaru. What was that guy's name again? Kankuro asked. Reiken, I think, Naruto responded. As they sat down, Reiken walked over to the machine and put in a CD. A bass solo filled the room as Reiken picked up the mic and put it to his lips. After song was finished the crowd applauded as Reiken made his way off the stage and sat down next to Choji, who was taking all you could eat to the limit with 4 plates loaded with a little of everything from the entire buffet, and Ino who was just having a small salad. Meanwhile, Yugito, where are we going? Ryuto asked, shouted. Oh I'm taking you guys out to celebrate for making it through the first test. Yugito said, hoping that Kai wouldn't suspect that she was really looking for our favorite blonde ninja, which he seemed to be very good at sensing what she was thinking. But unfortunately for her, she was right on the money. Yugito, the last time you treated us to something like this was when we completed that A-rank mission in Iowa, which was nothing more than you bringing us some sushi while we were healing up in the hospital. Kai said, deadpanning slightly. Yugito looked hurt. You didn't like my sushi? Not really, Kai said bluntly as he shoved his hands into his pockets and looked up at the stars. Yugito looked depressed. No matter how hard she tried, she could never get Kai to like her cooking, not that she really cared, but still. I did, Yugito, Ryuto said, hoping to raise her spirits. Kai always was a little too blunt with her. Kyo stuck his head out of his master's fro and jumped onto Yugito's head and began purring. See, Kyo liked your sushi too. Yugito smiled and started scratching Kyo on his neck. After some more walking, Ryuto and Yugito noticed that Kai wasn't following them anymore. Turning around, they saw why. Kai was standing outside of a place that sold his favorite snack, Pocky. A small wet spot was appearing on his mask near his mouth, which meant that he was probably drooling. He turned to Yugito and Ryuto, gave them a small wave and then charged in. A loud, "Ah, Kai, my favorite customer," came from inside the shop. I don't get it, Ryuto started. He goes to that shop like twice a day and he still stops and stares like that every time he goes there. Kai really likes Pocky, Yugito said simply and continued walking with Ryuto following close behind. Have you found him yet, Nibi? Yugito asked her tenant. Oh yeah, no doubt about it, I can sense that overstuffed, walking chakra powerhouse from about anywhere on the planet. The cat demon responded. Then why didn't you tell me where he went earlier so we could have followed him? Yugito asked, slightly angry. I wanted to see you sweat, dear. The cat demon chuckled as she sensed her jailer getting angry. Back with Emo King and the new sound team. Sasuke panted heavily as he jumped away from Iwado, a giant bone club in his hands. The ground shattered where Iwado had missed. Iwado had some small cuts and the left side of his face was covered in blood. Sasuke fell to the ground and slid to a stop. He looked at the three ninja in front of him, Sharingan flaring bright red in the moonlight. The girl known as Akiko had some bruises covering her body mixed with some small cuts. Kazoku was covered in dirt but no known visible cuts or bruises. The three sound ninja advanced on Sasuke. Iwado used a jutsu and his coffin flew over to him and he put it back on his back, smiling a menacing grin as the bone club broke apart into smaller bones and flew back into the coffin. Akiko moved her left fist away from her body and shouted, Kaden. Okibi Kobushi, too. Her fist was engulfed in a mini inferno with flames so bright it lit up the entire area. Kazoku stuck out his left hand as well and metal from his body began to form around his fist until it made a kind of metal glove with spikes on the knuckles. I'm reaching my limit, Iwado, and I can tell you are as well. Kazoku said calmly, sweat dripping from his brow and panting slightly. Iwado spit some blood out of his mouth. Tisk. Pant, shut up. I hate to say it but Kazoku is right, I can probably pull off one more Okibi and then I'm spent. Akiko said, panting as hard as Sasuke. Fine, Iwado said irritably. He raised his hand and pointed at Sasuke. Uchiha Sasuke, if you still strive for power, meet us here after the final exam. From there a group of Orochimaru-sama's most trusted men will take you to him personally, which is a great honor. The three then disappeared from the area, leaving a tired and worn-out Sasuke with a growing smirk on his face. Back with Naruto and crew. Well, hey, I wanna be a rockstar. Hey, I wanna be a rockstar. I don't own the end of the song, Rockstar, by Nickelback or any part of the song for that matter. Naruto and Kankuro bowed as the crowd went wild with applause. Naruto had been the lead singer and Kankuro was the second voice. The two went and sat down in their booth next to Tamari as the next person got ready for his turn. You sure he's here? Yugito asked Nibi as they stood outside of Maji's all-you-can-eat buffet. Yes, now go get him, honey. Nibi said in a happy voice. Yugito and Ryuto entered the restaurant. Welcome to Maji's, would you like the top or bottom floor? The waitress at the front desk asked. A top please. Yugito answered kindly. As the two arrived at the top of the stairs, Yugishio spotted her prey, Naruto Uzumaki in all his ramen slurping glory. Now placing his 20th bowl off to the side, he let out a satisfied sigh. Man, this is great. I haven't had this much ramen in such a long time. Hehehe. Shu Kyufu 3 would be really mad at me if he knew I was pigging out like this. Naruto said with mischievous grin on his face. At the Ryu clan compound. Aku. Catching a cold, Shujiki-sama. A young clansman asked as he helped Shujiki with some paperwork. Nah, probably Ju some GRL talkin' bout me some WHER, his nose is stuffy, Shujiki said as he blew his nose. Right, the clan member said under his breath. Wa was dat? Shujiki said looking up from his paperwork, a deadly gleam in his eye. No. Nothing, Shujiki-sama. Back to what we were doing. Wow, this is a nice place, how come I've never heard of it before? Ryuto asked himself as he looked around, admiring the restaurant around him. Hey Yugito. Ryuto looked at where she had been sitting but was no longer there. He stood up a bit and saw her walking towards our Naruto's table. She ditched me to go talk to that Suna ninja. Ah well, come on Kyo, let's go pig out. Meow. And they were off for the buffet. Yugito smirked as she approached Naruto's table, purposely bumping into his shoulder as she passed, making him spill his drink on his shirt. Hey, watch where you're going, you. Naruto started angrily but stopped as he looked up at Yugito's. Wow. Naruto thought as he stared up into the cat-like eyes of the Jinchuriki of the Nibi. Oh, I'm so sorry, Yugito said, with sincerity in her voice. Naruto bolted upward like he had been poked in the butt. Oh, don't worry about it, it's not like you meant to, he said, scratching the back of his head. Thanks for being understanding. She reached out with her hand. Hi, I'm Yugito ni. If I didn't know any better, Tamari thought with a small glare on her face. I'd say she was flirting with him. Doing well, honey, now keep going. Nibi cheered from inside her prison. Naruto Uzumaki, pleased to meet you. Naruto said, taking her hand and giving her a firm shake which she matched. I'm really sorry about your shirt. I know, I'll go get something to clean it up with. Yugito turned and headed towards the restroom, swaying her hips in seductive fashion that caught the attention of every male teenager in the place, including our boy Naruto. Naruto, put your eyeballs back in their sockets. Tamari said dangerously. Naruto smiled sheepishly but didn't say anything. Yugito returned after a bit with a damp washcloth in hand. Here, let me help you with that. She bent down and began rubbing the spill spot on his shirt. Naruto looked slightly flushed but didn't say anything. You're a bit too close, my friend, Tamari thought angrily. They're all better, Yugito said happily as she rose, slightly giving him a peck on the cheek. Naruto's blush flared to something that would put Hinata to shame. This small display of affection had gone unnoticed by Kankuro but not by Tamari. She is so dead, Tamari thought as she pulled her fan off her back, jumped out of her seat and brought it down on top of Yugito, who moved out of the way just in time. What the hell, Tamari? Kankuro shouted. Tamari shouted a battle cry and charged forward and slammed her fan down again. Tamari's eyes widened in surprise as a boy with an afro and a cat on his shoulder appeared in front of her and elbowed her in the gut. She flew back a bit but didn't lose her footing. You okay, Yugito? Ryuto shouted. Ryuto's appearance had changed, as did his cat Kyo. Ryuto now had cat-like eyes, fangs and long slender claws instead of fingernails. Ryuto and his family use the same style as the Inuzuka except they use cats, and Kyo's usual black and white was now a red color. It's okay, Ryuto, I just pumped into Naruto-kun over there and she got jealous. Yugito blushed slightly as she realized she had just called him Naruto-kun. Tamari was radiating with her intent, directing it at all Yugito, which made everyone around her back away a few steps. Tamari-chan, please stop. I'm sure Yugito-san didn't mean to. Naruto was sweating bullets. She was so scary when she was mad. Two Kumo Chunin appeared in the room. What's all this then? One of the Chunin said, looking between Tamari and Yugito. Well, he continued after getting no answer. It's nothing, sir. I'll see you later, Naruto-ku. I mean san. Yugishio smiled nervously and hurriedly left the restaurant with Ryuto behind her. After saying their goodbyes, Ryuto and Yugito went their separate ways. A blissful smile adorned her face. My little girl's growing up, the Nibi said, pretending to cry with joy. Oh, be quiet, Yugito said to her tenant playfully. She pulled out the key to her one-bedroom apartment and unlocked the door. It was a nice place and very clean, as you would expect from someone who is part cat. It had a small bathroom, a kitchen with the basics, a small den with a TV and a couch. Her bedroom was very small with only a bed for one person, a small dresser and a mirror. She sighed as she pulled the wrap out of her long ponytail and let her pale blonde hair hang down. After using the bathroom and changing into her sleep attire, she flopped down on her bed and let her tired muscles relax. You know, Yugito Uzumaki has a nice ring to it. Nibi, she shouted in her mind, a small blush spreading across her face. She smiled, though she thought it had a nice ring to it as well. Naruto and crew, I'm so tired, Kankuro shouted as he literally kicked the door down to their room. Oops. Fix it, Kankuro, came the gruff voice of their sensei, Baki. Kankuro swore as he sat down and began fixing the hinges. Oh, and Naruto, there's someone who wants to see you on the roof. Baki shouted from the other room. Naruto had a confused look on his face but shrugged and walked over to a window and flipped out of it onto the roof. Yo. Naruto looked up and smiled. Hey, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto said happily as he sat down next to his old sensei. Kakashi gave his famous eye smile and continued to read his little book. So how's it been? Kakashi asked. Great. I've gotten really strong and I've met a lot of new friends. My Kyufu is a really great guy, but he's kind of crazy sometimes, ha ha ha. I've been training really hard every day. I can see that, Kakashi said as he patted Naruto on the head. So how do you like it in Suna? It's pretty nice, but it takes some getting used to. It's good to see you again, Naruto said as he looked up at the starry sky. Well, I don't wanna keep ya, you've got a test tomorrow, so I'll catch ya later. Kakashi gave Naruto a one-armed hug and then disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Naruto smiled a bit before letting out a huge yawn. Hey everyone, name's Sumichi and I'm your next proctor. Your next test is an attack and defend test. He pointed with his one hand at the forts behind him. 2 teams will be paired with each fort. One team is the attacker while the other is the defender. The attacker's objective is to infiltrate the fort and steal this scroll. Sumichi pulled a black scroll from his shuriken pouch that had the words, "Top Secret," on the front. As a shinobi, there will be times where a mission calls for you to break into an enemy fort or stronghold. This test will prepare you for that day. The attacker will be given a basic map of the fort showing all visible entrances and exits and the basic location of the scroll, while the defenders will be given a more detailed map showing trapdoors, a detailed map of the interior and the exact location of the scroll. Now here's how things will work. Each pair of teams will be given a half an hour. If the attacking team takes the scroll and returns it to me, the attacking team wins, but if the defending team protects the scroll from capture and it stays in its original place during the time limit, then the attacking team loses. However, if the attacking team takes the scroll but is unable to make it outside due to the efforts of the defending team, such as a battle that turns into an impasse or the time runs out, the group of proctors observing each fort. He paused as about 30 shinobi dressed in black outfits, kind of like the ones that the Konoha proctors wear, appeared behind him in a cloud of dust, each wearing a sadistic grin. We'll decide on which team did the best based on the casualties of each team and on how each team performed their objective. If both teams have impressed the proctors equally, then they both pass. Now, By using the numbers from yesterday's test we shall decide who does what. One of the proctors handed him a clipboard. All right, team 17, 1, 95, 45, 9 and 27, you are attackers. Naruto's team, Yugito's team, a random team, Team 10, Kurisu's team and Iwato's team stepped forward. All right, you six are the attackers, here are your scrolls. Handing the clipboard back to the proctor, he reached into his shuriken pouch and pulled out 6 red scrolls and threw them to the attacking teams. Taking the clipboard back, he addressed the next set of teams. Okay, teams 81, 56, 43, 23, 39 and 7 are the defenders. Haku's team, Team 8, a random team, Mario's team, and 2 more teams walked out from the crowd. Here are your scrolls, Sumichi said and threw them each a blue scroll. You each have 10 minuets to examine your map, then I will pair you guys up. After that the defenders will an extra 10 minuets to set up a defense at their fort, and during that time the attackers can work on their battle plan again, and then it begins. And the teams set off getting ready. Naruto pulled open the scroll and laid it out on a flat rock. This should be pretty easy, don't ya think? Naruto asked as he began examining the map. He pointed to the front gate. The gate won't be much of a problem. Tamari or I could handle that pretty easy. Then again we could just jump over the perimeter wall. Yeah, but whoever our enemy is might be expecting us to do that, so let's go through the gate. Kankuro pointed out. Good point, Naruto said as he scratched his chin. Alright, tell me what you guys have in the way of tools. My fan, of course, about 20 kunai, some bomb tags and about 16 yards of wire. Tamari said, putting her hands on her hips. And where do you keep all that? Never mind, anyway, my puppets and all their gear, some kunai and shuriken, a roll of bomb tags and some smoke bombs. And I have my katana, my scroll, 30 kunai and 30 shuriken, and a roll of bomb tags. Okay, so we're pretty much set. Now here's the plan, and Naruto began to explain their game plan. Kurisu leaned up against a tree while Aimi and Mai were looking at the map. Well, more like Mai was looking at it because Aimi seemed more interested in a passing butterfly. He flexed his gloved right hand, which seemed to be hard to do and gave him pain. Just don't think about the pain, Kurisu, it'll all be worth it when it's finished. He thought as he stopped moving his hand and showed it into his pocket and leaned over them peering at the map. And then while that's happening we'll be able to get in, understand? Mai looked at Aimi and then up at Kurisu, who was leaning over her. A blush quickly spread across her face because of his closeness. That seems like a good plan, but who's going to do the distraction? Mai and Kurisu looked at Aimi. She giggled as the butterfly landed on her nose and made it look as though she had a mask on. The two looked back at each other and then back at her. Aimi, they said in unison. Wah, she mumbled as the butterfly flew off and she stared blankly back at them. Alright, let's do this, boys. Ino shouted, pumping her arm into the air. This is so going to rock, right, Akamaru? Alright, everyone get in line. Sumichi shouted. The attackers stood in a row and the defenders in another. Now teams 23 and 17, Team Naruto and Team Mario, are on Fort 1. Also, to make sure you don't leave your fort and try to grab another fort's scroll, a barrier will be placed around each fort. The barrier will also give the illusion of nighttime to give the attacking team an advantage. Okay, now for the rest. The order I call you is the fort you get. Teams 9 and 56 Team Kurisu and Team 8 Teams 1 and 7 Team Yugito and Random Team, Teams 95 and 39, both Random Teams, 43 and 45 Team 10 and Random Team, and lastly Teams 27 and 81 Team Iwato and Team Haku. Now those of you defending, please make your way to your forts. Those of you attacking, remain where you're standing. Mario's team moved towards the fort with the big number 1 on the gate. Mario, Eshiku and Rei entered the fort. Mario and Rei-chan will defend the inside. Will Eshiku stay outside and defend the entrance? Mario asked, tilting his head to the side. Tisk, whatever. Eshiku jumped onto the roof and sat the top of the arch of the building. Throwing his left arm out to the side, he now held his bow, Reaching around, he pulled a shaft with a glass arrow head free from the quiver and notched it onto the string. The rest of the defending teams entered their respective forts and began making their defense. Naruto and the rest of the attacking teams stood about 50 yards away from their respective front gates. Around the perimeters of the forested area, 3 proctors each stood making hand signs, and together they shouted, Shueki Jutsu, Yoinokuchi Kengoku, 1. A large black cube covered the area. Like the name suggested, it instantly became dark inside the cube, making it seem like 10 p.m. at night. The attackers stood still for a while, waiting for their eyes to adjust to the darkness. Go! Sumichi shouted, and the teams were off towards their targets. I can't see a damn thing. Eshiku growled under his breath as he waited for the enemy to approach. Maybe I should use it, he thought absent-mindedly, leaning back on the roof with his bow notched not out of reach. Remember, boy, I told you to never use it unless you had to. Gobi warned. But I can't see the enemy like this. If I used it I could see them. Besides, it's my eye, I can use it if I want. Why, you ungrateful, I'm the one who replaced your eye after it got cut out. Or did you forget that little tidbit of information? Besides, you know how much strain it puts on your body. Gobi said, narrowing his yellow hawk eyes from inside his prison. Eshiku became silent but stared, moving his hand towards his eye patch. Boy, I told you, but Eshiku cut him off. Shut up. You're the reason I hurt Ray and lost my eye in the first place, or did you forget that little tidbit of information? Eshiku growled mockingly with a pang of guilt and remorse in his voice and ripped the eye patch from his face. Behind it was a bright yellow hawkeye that was visibly clear in the dark. Eshiku growled in pain as the demonic chakra began flowing through his chakra network, but now he could see in the dark as well as he could in daylight and shoot with pinpoint accuracy. There they are, Eshiku said with satisfaction as he drew up his bow and pulled back on the string. The glass tip of his arrow began glowing blue as he began applying chakra into it, and he fired. We're almost there, Naruto whispered as they jumped from tree to tree. Their eyes widened as they heard the sound of cloven air. Look out! Ack! Tamari screamed in horror as the flying projectile went straight through Naruto's heart and out his back. She sighed in relief as the Naruto went, poof, and was replaced with a log. Kankuro jumped behind a tree and unwrapped Karasu. What the hell was that? Kankuro shouted to Tamari, who was taking cover behind another tree not far from him. Tisk! Damn, that was just a replacement. He pulled 3 more glass-tipped arrows from his quiver and notched them. The first arrow began to glow a bright red, the second glowed an electric blue, and the final one gave off a ghostly white glow. Using my elemental chakra, boy, Gobi said with anger. With the Gobi, each tail has a different type of chakra. Since he has 5 tails, so Eshiku has access to all 5 types of chakra. Shut up. You owe me for making my life a living hell no other man has been faced with. Boy, is he wrong. He scanned the area with a watchful eye. Where are you? Eshiku thought. Fort 2. Kiba and Akamaru tensed as they heard a noise. Kiba pulled a kunai free from his kunai holster. They stood atop the main gate and were on full alert. Show yourself, Kiba shouted. He waited for a bit and strained his ears and eyes to try and catch any glimpse of the enemy. Sweat lightly began dripping down his forehead. If he even so much as reacted slowly to a sound, it could mean that the enemy would get him and he'd be dead. Whatcha doin'? Kiba nearly jumped out of his skin as a voice came from his right. He fell on his butt and looked up. Standing where he had before was the light blue-haired girl Naruto had introduced as Aimi Ryu. Wah! What the hell, you almost frickin' gave me a heart attack. Kiba shouted. Oh sorry, I'm Aimi Ryu and you are? She asked sweetly. I know who you are. How do you know who I am? Have you been spying on me? Hentai. She screeched and smacked him across the face, covering her chest with her other hand as if he could see through her shirt. Kiba fell backwards and nearly off the perimeter wall. Bah! Baka! Naruto introduced us just the other day. Kiba shouted, rubbing the red hand print of his face. Really? I don't remember you. Oh well. Sniff, sniff. Why do you smell like a dog? She asked. She looked down and suddenly squealed with delight. What a kawaii puppy. She then began to squeeze Akamaru into her chest. Lucky dog. Why can't that happen to me for once? Kiba thought wryly, almost completely forgetting the test and note the key word is almost. Good job, sis. Kurisu thought as he and Mai jumped the wall and made their way inside while she distracted Kiba. As they entered the fort, they noticed a black wall blocking the way to the top floor, but there was something odd about the wall, it seemed to be alive. I don't know how you made it past Kiba. Kurisu and Mai turned towards the owner of the voice. But you won't make it past me. Shino said in his usual monotone voice. I'll take him, Kurisu-san, you get the scroll. Mai said as she pulled a kunai from her sleeve. Kurisu only nodded as he turned towards the living wall. Naruto said this guy was an Aburame, so that must mean these are. He grinned sadistically and began forming hand signs. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. The large fireball hit the wall of insects. A strange scream was emitting from the bugs as the not-so-burned ones and the ones that had escaped began to scatter and return to Shino's body, allowing Kurisu to press on to the next level. Once he reached the top of the stairs, he was greeted by a long corridor. Better be careful, this seems like an ideal place to set up traps. Kurisu thought as he carefully made his way down the hall. He was about to take another step when something caught his eye. He jerked his foot back just in time and bent down to observe the trip wire. Child's play, he thought smugly as he stepped over the wire. Once doing so, hidden seals revealed themselves along both sides of the wall around him and kunai shot out of them. Kurisu was barely able to dodge them, escaping with only some minor cuts. He bent down and picked up another wire. A double wire trap. Hey, I guess these guys are better than I thought, Kurisu thought, throwing the wire down. He again started advancing down the hallway. At the end of the hall, Hinata hid behind the corner. She activated her Byakugan. She gasped slightly. This guy had a huge amount of chakra, but about a level lower than Naruto's. I don't know if I could beat him. She thought, holding her hand to her mouth. She shook her head. I have to try, like Naruto would. She thought, trying to build confidence. Kurisu was halfway down the hallway when he set off a trap that another volley of kunai, one almost pinning him to the wall by his privates. Too close. He thought, sweating bullets. Fort 3. A groan came from the last member of the team. Yugito and her team were attacking. The other two were knocked out, sprawled out across the floor. Kai sat it on the one he had just knocked out, his mask down and a pocky stick hanging limply from his mouth. He was slightly out of breath. Ryuto was leaning up against the wall while he was chugging a bottle of water. He was covered in sweat. He pulled a small water bowl from his shuriken pouch and poured some water into it for Kyo, who happily began lapping it up. Yugito appeared in the room with the scroll in her hand. She smiled as she held it up. Well, that was sure a lot harder than the last test. Kai said as his eyes returned to their original form. Yeah, I'm almost out of chakra. Ryuto panted out. Yugito rubbed the bruise on her cheek but still smiled. Come on. We have to hurry up and get back before time runs out. Skipping Fort 4 and moving on to Fort 5. Nikuden Sensha. 2. There was a loud crashing noise as Choji smashed down the front gate. Two of the defending ninja ran forward and threw kunai at the big target that was Choji. Crap! Choji shouted. Raken appeared in between Choji and the oncoming knives. Kaden. 3. It was not perfect, leaving some small gaps, but it was able to block all of the kunai. Thanks, Raken. Choji shouted, reverting back to his normal size. The two defending ninja charged at them, but one of them stopped and started flailing around. Damn, what's wrong with my body? The ninja shouted. He then turned on the other ninja and began swinging at him with his kunai. What the hell are you doing, Kuwabara? The other ninja shouted as blocked his teammates' hits. Hey, Shinranshin no Jutsu, 4 complete. Ino said as she stepped out from the shadows of a nearby tree. Raken walked over to the one that Ino wasn't controlling and held him up by the neck while the other one stood still. Come out and give us the scroll, or I both of them. Raken shouted as a retractable blade shot out of his left gauntlet and pressed against the other ninja's neck. They waited until their final teammate came out of the fort holding the scroll. She looked very frightened. Here now, please don't hurt them. She pleaded as she rolled the scroll to Raken. He picked it up and threw it to Choji, who checked it in case it was a fake. It's the real deal, Choji shouted. Good. Now let's move, guys. Dinner's on me. Raken shouted but quickly looked like he regretted saying it. He had only known Choji for a short time and already knew how much the big-boned ninja could eat. Alright. Fort 6. Kaden. Okibi Kobushi, 5. Akiko shouted as she rammed her fist into the ice mirror that was currently in her and her team's way. She kept pushing the attack. It seemed to be making headway, but the ice kept fixing itself. She jumped away from the ice wall and leaned on the floor. Iwado gave a amused snort but kept quiet as he took a drag on his cigarette. That was impressive, Haku said as she appeared in the ice mirror. But it's going to take a lot more than that to break these walls. Iwado's eye narrowed and placed his coffin horizontally right before two ice mirrors smashed into the corridor from either side of them. The coffin blocked them effectively. Haku seemed slightly surprised that he sensed the mirrors coming. The coffin creaked open and bones began to fly out of it and formed into a giant club. Iwado backed down the corridor a bit. Ha! Iwado shouted as he swung the club at the clear wall and demolished it. Come on, he shouted. Akiko and Kazoku jumped through first, with Iwado coming in last after he pulled his coffin out from between the two walls of ice, which slammed together with a great force. HMPH, glad I made the framework of my coffin out of chakra-enforced steel. Iwado thought as he put it back on his back. As he examined his new surroundings, he noticed that Kazoku was already fighting a girl with a wooden katana that seemed to be flowing with chakra. Akiko and I shall continue on, Iwado shouted. Kazoku pulled his katana up and blocked Kiko's strike. Kazoku grunted slightly, which they took as an okay. Uho, Naruto shouted. The arrows shot forward at him. They were not as fast as his shots from his bow would have been, but that didn't change the fact that there were still. Razor jumped to the side as a volley of arrows shot past. A smirk graced his face. If they were all as fast as that, then there wasn't any problem. Naruto's eyes widened as he heard the sound of cloven air from behind him. Turning around, he found the volley he had just dodged was coming right back at him. Crap, they're homing too. Naruto jumped into the air away from them again. He looked down and another volley was coming at him from under him. He gathered chakra to his feet and K's Sutepute away from the oncoming barrage of arrows. Is he going to be okay by himself? Tamari asked as Kankuro smashed a window and slid into a small unfurnished room. Tamari was still standing outside the window watching Naruto dodging and running from the arrows. He'll be fine, Tamari. Now come on. Tamari hesitated for a second but compiled and slid in through the window. A loud crash sounded from another room and suddenly a teal-blue-haired boy smashed through the door in front of them, in each hand a large broadsword that was 5 feet in length and 6 inches from the right side of the blade to the other. His hair was slightly out of place and covered in dust. He had sort of insane look in his eye. Mario will slay you, the green and blue-eyed ninja shouted as he lunged at them with surprising speed. Mario swung his right sword at their heads while stabbing with the left one. Tamari jumped out of the way, but Kankuro was too slow. She screamed as the left broadsword went through Kankuro's stomach and the right sword embedded 2 inches into his neck, but no blood spilled out. Instead, sand began to fall off Kankuro's face until it revealed it to be Karasu. Kankuro squatted in the window and began flexing his fingers up and down. Karasu's arms began to wrap around the sword in its gut. Mario looked frightened as the puppet began to pull the sword out of his grasp. He frantically tried to get it away. He jerked his other broadsword from the puppet's neck and swung again, lobbing its head completely off, which had no effect at all. Finally, the puppet jerked his left broadsword from his hand, which was a mistake because as soon as the sword left Mario's grasp, it began to emit a pained scream, like a little terrified girl screaming for her parents whom she could not find. Kankuro clasped his hands to his ears as the sound began to hurt his head, which caused Karasu drop to the floor and released the sword. Before it could hit the ground, Mario had reclaimed it and began to chop the motionless puppet into pieces with a vigor, as if the lifeless thing had wronged him in a horrible way. The sword was still whimpering like a crying child as he put it back into the sheath on his back. Grasping his other sword with both hands, he glared at Kankuro with a deep hatred. Mario will only tell the Suna shinobi once. If the Suna shinobi ever try and take them from Mario again, Mario will rip you to pieces with his bare hands. Mario shouted the insane, murderous look back in his eye. Kankuro gulped. That look reminded him way too much of how Gaara used to be. Eshiku slowly got to his feet. What was that attack? How could he have taken damage from such a small thing? He looked up and found the orange and black clothed boy was still dodging the arrows. The boy's left shoulder was bleeding as half of a shaft stuck out of it. Eshiku threw his left arm out and his bow flew through the air and landed in his palm. He held his stomach with his other hand as the burn marks still continued to sear his skin. Futon. Datapa. The boy shouted and blew away another volley of arrows. Removing his hand from his stomach, he held it in the air and an arrow flew to his hand. He notched the shaft and drew back. How many arrows am I going to have to break? Naruto thought as another volley flew at him. He pulled his katana from its sheath and held it in front of himself. He closed his eyes as the arrows flew closer to him. When they were only feet from him, he jerked open his eyes and shouted. Kenjutsu. Kishigai Katana Tate 1. Naruto began to swing his sword all around his body, cutting and deflecting every arrow that came his way. After he blocked the last arrow, he fell back to the ground and landed on the roof of the fort. He was panting hard as he leaned on the roof using his sword to stabilize himself. Damn, I had forgotten how much energy that move costs. Naruto stood up and wiped the sweat from his brow. I hope the other two are alright. Ah crap. Naruto thought as yet another salvo of arrows came flying at him. He dodged them again as he jumped into the air and the arrows flew past him. He landed next to the perimeter wall in a crouched position. When he stood up, he felt a horrible pain and was shot back and pinned against the wall. A spray of blood came out of his mouth. He slowly looked down at the shaft protruding from his stomach. It was very deep, the gray feathers of the arrow touching his skin. He was lucky it hadn't snapped his spine. He looked up and saw the person he had attacked pointing the bow at him. Naruto could clearly feel the demonic chakra radiating off of his body. The teen threw his bow to the ground. After that, he ripped a piece of cloth from his camouflage trench coat and wrapped it over his hawk eye, hiding it from view. The demonic chakra slowly began to diminish until Naruto could barely feel it. Eshiku began walking towards him, picking up Naruto's fallen katana as he came. Back to Fort 2. Gatsuga, 2. Kiba shouted as he and Akamaru began spinning rapidly towards Aimi. She jumped away from the oncoming human drill and slid to a halt. She looked up and found Akamaru, now transformed into Kiba. He slashed at her with his right hand. Aimi pulled her kodachi from its sheath, blocked the attack. She was rammed in the side as the real Kiba came in with an elbow to the ribs. Following up, Akamaru grabbed Aimi's arm and swung he around back to Kiba, who rammed his foot into her gut. She began coughing as she tried to get the air back into her lungs. She rose to her feet shakily and jumped back onto the perimeter wall and began flashing throw hand signs. Hyouten. Isu Ryu, 3. The temperature of the area dropped slightly as a dragon made of ice shot out of her hands and charged at Kiba and Akamaru. The two jumped away as the dragon slammed into the ground, making everything in a 10-yard radius covered in ice. Kiba threw some kunai which Aimi blocked with her kodachi. Kurisu had finally made it down the long corridor. He was covered in sweat, small cuts and his eyebrows were singed. Come on, kunai, bomb tags, smoke bombs, caltrops with a genjutsu that made them blend with the floor. Hell, there was even a pile of dog shit that I somehow managed to step in. Kurisu continued to scrap his foot on the floor. But finally I have made it to the end of the, holy crap. Kurisu jerked his head back just in time as a kunai came flying at him from around the corner. So the last one is over there, Kurisu thought as he pulled Saraiba from its sheath and held it out in front of himself. Hinata gulped. That was the last kunai she had. They had used her kunai to make the traps since they were going to be at the front lines while she guarded the scroll. She watched with her Byakugan as he continued to slowly come closer to her. She backed away from the corner and back down the hall towards the scroll. When he was almost out of the corridor, she gasped as she tripped over her own feet. Oh, oh no. Hinata thought as she started to get up, only to be pushed back down as a blade went through the hood of her jacket and pinned her to the floor. She looked up into the flame-red eyes of Kurisu. Why is he glaring at me? Hinata thought, terrified as the red-haired boy continued to glare at her. Tisk. She doesn't have that damn mark, so she must be from the main branch. Hyuga scum. I should probably just her, but then again she seems different. She seems less proud and more timid than the other main branch Hyugas I meet. When an emissary of theirs came to the compound to talk to Tu-san about something, never found out what it was about. Never mind that now. He jerked the sword out of the ground and her coat and leveled the point over her. Hinata was terrified. Was this guy really going to her? What had she done to make him glare at her with such hate? She was trembling all over as he continued to hold the sword over her. Should I? Kurisu thought. Why was he hesitating? He hated before, so why was this any different? But for some reason something in the back of his head was telling him not to her. He jerked the blade away from her and put it back in his sheath. He bent down next to her and put his mouth next to her ear. Sorry, Kurisu said before he gave her a swift karate chop to the back of the neck which knocked her out. Team Yugito, congrats. You're the first team to make it back. Sumichi said, taking the top secret scroll from Yugito and handing it over to a proctor. Now go get yourself checked out by the medic nins and get some lunch. Sumichi said, smiling slightly and pointing over to a large tent with a red cross on the front. Food, Ryuto shouted, running off towards the tent. Yugito and Kai slowly made their way towards the tent. What a moron, Kai deadpanned. Yugito giggled slightly. She looked over her shoulder at the large black cube, the part of the cube where their fort was dissolved, and a group of proctors ran towards it to begin moving the injured out and to begin rebuilding what was destroyed. Another part of the cube dissolved as Team 10 exited and handed over their scroll. I wonder if Naruto-kun is okay. Back to Fort 6. A bone sword and kunai clashed as Takaru and Iwado swung at each other. A power struggle ensued with both ninja pushing hard at the other. Hey, I know who you are, Takaru said as they continued to try and overpower the other. You're Honhito Iwado, 4, you're wanted dead in Iwa for robbing the Naitami Tsuchikage's grave and stealing his corpse. I'm honored that even a punk like you knows my name. Now die, Iwado shouted as he pushed even-haired and sliced his kunai in half. Takaru jumped back, did a backflip and landed on his feet. He swiped his hand at Iwado and cut spread across his cheek. What the? Soon Iwado was getting slashed all over his body as Takaru continued to swing and flail his arms at him, Takaru's razor wires slicing into his skin. Leave him alone, Kaden. Okibi Kobushi, 5. Akiko came from behind him and slammed her fist into Takaru's face, sending him crashing out through the wall and out into the courtyard. Akiko ran over to Iwado and tried to help him up, but he pushed her away and shakily stood up himself. He was covered in minor to medium-sized cuts, with blood slowly dripping from them. Are you all right, Iwado-san? Akiko asked, worry in her voice. Iwado didn't answer her. He just stared at the hole where Akiko had sent Takaru through. Iwado-san. Iwado-san, please, you're scaring me more than usual. But he continued to ignore her. Finally standing still, he removed the coffin from his back and slammed it down on the ground. The coffin slowly creaked open and 4 small bones floated to his palm. He threw the bones into the air and they landed back in the palm of his hand. Iwado spit blood from his mouth as he continued to stare at the bones. He closed his hand tightly, grinding the 4 small bones into dust. He picked his coffin back up and started walking towards the hole in the wall, a manic grin on his face. Iwado-san, please answer me, Akiko called again. The bones say, They don't if I'm going to win or not. Hey, and that's the kind of fight I've been wanting all my life. Get the scroll and regroup with Kazoku. And with that, Iwado jumped out of the hole and down into the courtyard. Yet again back to Fort 1. Naruto's eyes began to open and close as blood continued to pour from his wound. His opponent getting closer, with his katana raised over his head. Naruto began trying to pull the arrow from his stomach, but his hands were too wet with his own blood to grasp it right. He fought to stay awake, but even if he could stay awake, what was he going to do? Damn, no use, can't stay awake. When Naruto opened his eyes again, he was no longer pinned to the wall of the fort but was now in the sewer of his mind. He began making the long walk towards the Kyuubi's prison, knowing he was in for it. As he entered the corridor that led to his tenant's prison, he could already feel his anger. That stupid little Gaki, how could he be losing to that damn Gobi? I should have him all those years ago. If only. Ahha, there you are, you whelp. Kyuubi shouted as Naruto entered the room. Chill out, Kyuubi. Naruto started but was cut short as the Kyuubi roared with anger. Don't you tell me to chill out. You are losing and I don't like it. What do you have against this guy, and who the hell is Gobi? Is that guy's name? Naruto shouted back at the king demon. He didn't answer right away but paused. The great fox closed its eyes as if he were trying to remember an old memory. Years ago, before the creation of the shinobi villages, I and another of the Biju, Gobi no Taka, engaged in a battle that lasted for 3 days straight. Even though I had the upper hand, having 4 times the chakra, he was as clever and as cunning as I was, plus he could fly. Kyuubi sighed. It was the closet I had ever come to losing. I had used up almost 3/4 of my chakra by the end of it. On the 3rd day he fell to the ground, his chakra exhausted. I had thought of him, but spared his life because of the tremendous fight he had given me. Okay, so what does this have to do with the guy outside? Naruto asked. That boy is the Jinchuriki of the Gobi. Meaning? Naruto asked, scratching his head. That means he's like you. He has a demon sealed inside him as well. Naruto's eyes widened but then narrowed. Red chakra began to pour out of the cage and climb up Naruto. Now that the history lesson is over, it's time for you to get out there and show him what you can do. Kyuubi said with a look that said, you better win or you are so toast. Eshiku brought down the katana on top of Naruto with great speed. Now die, he shouted, but right when those words left his mouth, red chakra began to swirl around the boy and pushed Eshiku back. Naruto grabbed the arrow and ripped it out of his gut and discarded it. What is this chakra? It's almost like yours, Gobi, but red. Eshiku thought. That's because, boy, that's the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the so-called king of the demons. Eshoka's eyes widened. Was there really another person like him? Another person who had gone through a hell that you had to call your childhood? But no matter. Right now he was the enemy and there was no way he was going to lose here. He narrowed his eyes and ripped the piece of cloth off of his face again, the Gobi's chakra flowing back into his chakra network, only this time with a more noticeable reaction. Gray chakra began swirling around Eshiku, his bandana flying off of his head. A hawk head made of the gray chakra hovered above him, then shot up into the air with a kind of sonic boom effect, and a deafening cry of a hawk echoed throughout the area. Both Jinchuriki stood face to face, both of their appearances changing with the continuing flow of demonic chakra. Naruto's hair became more unruly, his fingernails turned into claws, his canines grew, his whisker marks became more defined, and his bright blue eyes became a blood-red color with slit pupils. Eshiku's hair began to grow until it reached the middle of his back, now a dark gray like the chakra covering his body. His other eye also took on a hawk-like appearance. Feathers began to sprout by his scalp like an Indian head-dress, and his fingers turned into long talons. What the hell? Kankuro muttered. There was a small cut on his forehead and his hat was missing. Mario looked out through a window into the courtyard where Kankuro's gaze was directed and his eyes widened. Oh no, Ray said under her breath as she caught sight of what was happening outside. Tamari looked outside as well and gasped. Naruto and Eshiku continued to stare each other down. The sheer amount of chakra was making the area hard to breathe and the barrier over the fort seemed to be weakening. What the hell is going on? A proctor from outside the barrier shouted as said barrier was on the verge of breaking. What is your name, boy? Eshiku asked, his deep carrying to every part of the fort. Uzumaki Naruto. And yours? Naruto growled back. Bloodlust under intent was thick in the air. It seemed that their tenants' rivalry was already starting to take effect on them as well. Eshiku of Kusagakure. And without another word the two shinobi lunged at each other. Eshiku reared his arm back and threw Naruto's katana at him. Naruto dodged it by jumping to the side. The katana blew a hole in the perimeter wall and kept going. Naruto felt the air behind him shift and grabbed Eshicu's fist before it could collide with his head and flipped him over his shoulder. Eshiku twisted his body in mid-air and landed upright when he hit the ground. The two began to exchange blows, each blow either blocked or countered. Fort 2. What in the world? Kurisu thought as he ran down the corridor with the top-secret scroll in his pocket. What are those gigantic chakras? Krushu shook his head. He had to pay attention to what he was doing or he could trip a trap he missed the first time. Kurisu looked down the stairs. Shino was at the bottom of the steps with a trembling Mai at his feet. Aw shit, I forgot she can't stand bugs. Kurisu jumped down the stairs, pulling Tsuruyabe from its sheath and slashing downward, cutting Shino's right arm from his body. Kurisu's smirk faded as Shino's body began to dissolve into bugs. He looked around the room but couldn't find Shino anywhere, so he scooped up my bridal style and ran out of the fort. Aimi and Kiba were standing opposite of each other, both looking exhausted. Coming. Kurisu shouted as he jumped the wall and back to Sumichi. See ya later, Kiba-san. Aimi shouted sweetly and jumped after her brother. Kiba jumped after them with Akamaru behind him, but when he reached the wall he heard a sizzling. Looking down he found a bomb tag. Crap. Fort 6. Raiden. Arakudariku Amino no. 6. Takaru shouted as he threw a ball of lightning at Iwado. The left side of Takaru's face was covered with severe burns. Iwado dodged the ball of lightning by jumping into the air. The ball hit the wall behind him and exploded, covering the wall with lightning that spread out like a web. While Iwado was still in mid-air he pulled his coffin off his back and threw it at Takaru like a javelin. Takaru rolled to the side, dodging the flying coffin by mere inches. Takaru began to charge at Iwado while he was falling back to earth but felt something grab his ankle. Turning around he found the skeleton that was engraved into his coffin had come to life and was the one grabbing his ankle. Ah, so I see you've met my dad. Iwado chuckled as he began walking over to the downed Suna ninja. And don't go giving me that hole. How could you do something like that to your dad? Iwado spit on the ground as if the mention of his dad left a bad taste in his mouth. And I'll tell ya how I could do something like that to my dad. He passed as he lit up a smoke and took a long hard drag. I could do something like that after he beat my mother most of my childhood. I could do that to him after he'd my twin brother in one of his drunken rages, and I could go on and on, but what's even the use of that? See that crack in his skull? That's how wide the useless trash. Iwado was now grinning like a complete lunatic. He walked closer to Takaru and pulled a kunai from his pocket. Say hi to him for me when you meet him in hell. Tell him yourself. Iwado's eyes widened as he felt something pierce his chest. Looking down he found a wooden katana sticking out of his chest. You okay, Takaru-kun? Keiko asked from behind Iwado. He nodded as he shook the now motionless skeleton from his ankle. Keiko pulled the sword out of his body, and as soon it was all the way out he disappeared along with his coffin. Hi, but where's Haku? She's holding off that fire chick and the metal dude. Keiko responded as she wiped the blood from her sword. Well, we better go help her. Takaru growled. What's left of Fort 1? The area that used to be Fort 1 was now more of a disaster zone. The front of the fort had been totally destroyed. The ground was covered with craters. Fallen trees littered the ground. there little to nothing left of the perimeter wall. The barrier jutsu was holding, but only just, and among it all 2 ninjas stood being fueled by their tenants. Eshiku was void of clothing besides his pants, 2 spiral burn marks on his chest where the first and a second Rasengan had made contact. Naruto was missing his trench coat and his scroll was nowhere to be seen, a long diagonal cut spread across his chest. Both shinobi were on the brink of exhaustion. "Shall we end this, Uzumaki?" Eshiku said. It was more of a statement than an actual question. He began forming hand seals. Sum no Gobi. 7th gray chakra began forming around Eshiku's right arm like a small tornado which curved at the tip like a claw. "Hey, why not, Rasengan?" Naruto and Eshiku charged at each other. Time seemed to slow down, their breathing louder in their heads than it really was, their hearts beating hard, they could hear nothing outside of what they were doing. Both were only inches apart, they rammed their attacks at each other. Both of the powerful moves smashed into each other, creating a large explosion, but that didn't stop them, they continued ram their attack at each other waiting for the other falter. After what seemed like hours to the both of them, their attacks exploded, sending each into the other direction. The man bowed to the Raikage. The Raikage was a tall man with a black goatee, with long hair parted down the middle, think Stark from Bleach, and he was dressed in the yellow cage robes of Kumogakure. He was in his mid to late 30s. Beside his throne stood 2 people. On his left was a blonde-haired girl with pigtails who looked about 13 years old, the Raikage's apprentice. She was a snotty little girl who loved to berate people and make herself look better. But the man wouldn't deny, her intellect was quite impressive. Men's interests. The other was from a foreign country called America. He had dirty blonde hair swept back, a pair of sunglasses and a large black trench coat that covered his whole body. He looked as if his family had originated from Asia, and he had a goatee that was almost the same as the Raikage's. He was not a ninja and did not have chakra, but he was good in martial arts and he was very skilled with the weapon he called a gun. And in front of the throne were 3 men in white lab coats. "What do you want, Uchida?" The Raikage said, clearly irritated at being interrupted during his meeting with his top researchers. The head ninja gulped, but not loud enough to be heard. "I have the results of the second Chunin exam here, Raikage-sama." Suddenly the violent attitude of the Raikage disappeared and he actually smiled, which was a rarity. Uchida walked up to the Raikage and handed him the clipboard. The Kage skimmed through the list as if looking for a specific person or persons. So the main branch Hyuga and her team failed, That's a setback. And as soon as it had come, the Raikage's attitude changed quite drastically. This time Uchida's gulp was quite audible, causing the Raikage's apprentice to snicker at him. But Raikage-sama, if you look closer, both the side branch males passed and are heading to the preliminaries. Uchida said, saying the word males a bit louder. Raikage got what he meant rather quickly and smirked. "I see your point. With the 2 of them we should be able to impregnate several women and finally have the Byakugan. Because of your predecessor's failure we could have had it much sooner." Uchida looked as if he wanted to say something but stopped himself. This did not go unnoticed by the Kage. "What is it, Uchida?" the Kage asked. "Well, speaking of my predecessor, his son is taking the Chunin exam, as a Sunanin under Zabuza Momochi now of Sunagakure." The Raikage looked slightly amused and looked back to the clipboard. "Ah, so little Takaru is indeed back in the village. Hey, the little fool, tell the demoness and her team to him if they get the chance." The Raikage threw the list of names back to Uchida. "Very well, tell Yugito that her new target is the Hyuga boys and make sure she gets the stronger one." "What's his name?" "Neji, that's right. Hi Raikage-sama. And make sure you don't slip up, loser." The Raikage's apprentice shouted at him. Uchida simply bowed and left the room. "Make the preparations immediately." "Hi." The 3 men in the lab coats bowed and walked out of the room. Finally, the Raikage slumped back into his throne, setting his head on his right arm that was leaning against the armrest of his seat. Finally we shall obtain the Byakugan, and Konoha will no longer be the only village with one of the three great dojutsu. That ought to knock them down a few pegs. The American man sighed as if he was tired of hearing that. The Yondaime Reikage gave him an irritated glance. Sorry if I offended you, Kashikoi Nisan, but ever since we were kids you've always been obsessed with Kekai Genkais and clans. Hey, remember when you spent 3 whole days in Tucsan's library reading all those books about clans that have binned off? Haha, Mom was so worried. For the first 2 days she thought you hated yourself. Well, at least I kept to our family's tradition and became a ninja, unlike you who preferred to run about and dream of money and ways to spend it and all that nonsense. Martial arts films. A difference of interests, Nisan. Anyway, what did you need again? Kashikoi handed his little brother a slip of paper. Burn that after you've seared that information into your memory, Benzaiden Odo. Hi, I'll be back later. Benzaiden said lazily as he shoved the slip of paper into his coat pocket and walked out of the room humming a random tune. Kumogakure Hospital. Where am I? Naruto thought as he opened his eyes before slamming them back shut. Okay, white ceiling, overly bright light, strange smell, yeah, I'm in a hospital. Naruto opened his eyes slowly, this time after adjusting to the light. His entire body ached and creaked as sat up. Looking over at the other bed in the hospital room, his eyes widened in shock. What the hell are you doing here? Quiet down. You're giving me a headache, boy. Eshiku growled as he sat up in bed polishing his bow with a rag. What are you doing here? Naruto said with more of an inside voice. Healing up. What does it look like I'm doing, boy? Eshiku growled at him. Naruto sat down Indian style on his bed looking over at Eshiku as he gently rubbed his bow with the rag. Eshiku had his right leg in a cast. So, I broke your leg. Eshiku slowly nodded his head as his bow went poof. In 4 places. Naruto winced slightly. Eshiku chuckled at his reaction. Don't feel sorry for me. Thanks to the Gobi and the doctors, I'll have my leg out of this damn thing today. Eshiku growled as he gave the white cast a thump with his fist. How long have I been out? Naruto asked as he grabbed a glass of water from the nightstand next to him. We've been in here a whole week. Naruto choked on his water. After clearing his throat, he looked at Eshiku with red eyes. Cough. A whole week. What about the exams? Eshiku moved his hands away from his ears and gave the blonde ninja a glare. Please stop yelling. Anyway, don't worry. Since a lot of the competitors were injured during the last exam, they postponed it for 9 days. All those who are not able to make it to the next exam are disqualified. So it starts tomorrow. Wait, who else was injured? Naruto asked, concerned for his friend's well-being. Eshiku picked up his cast leg and moved it to a more comfortable position. My teammate Mario was brought in for poisoning, most likely from your teammate. A red-haired boy named Kurisu was also brought in from getting poisoned. A girl named Aimi Ryu was brought in for minor to medium cut wounds. An Oto nin was brought in for a major stab wound to his chest, a Suna nin with 3rd-degree burns to his face, another Oto nin was brought in suffering from intense frostbite, the 2 of us, a Konoha nin suffering from small shrapnel wounds and small burns, another Suna nin who was suffering from chakra exhaustion, 3 Taki nin who are in for major blood loss, and a couple others I don't remember. Wow, that's a lot. Where'd you learn all this? Naruto asked. Anime and manga. I asked the nurse. Oh, your friends were just here, Eshiku continued. I think they said something about getting lunch and then coming back. Suddenly the door to the hospital room came crashing down. Naruto stood up bolt right and got into a taijutsu stance. Eshiku brought out his bow and drew an arrow from his sheath that was next to his bed. Slowly the dust began to clear, revealing a tall blue wavy-haired woman with dark blue eyes, in a dark blue kimono with the symbol of the Ryu clan on the front. She had a very pretty heart-shaped face and an ample chest. Manami Daibo, godmother. Naruto shouted in disbelief. Naruto-kun. She screamed and cleared the gap between them in under a second and had him in a bone-crushing hug under that. Oh, I was so worried about all of you when I found out all of you were in the hospital. Eshiku sat there looking at the two with a neutral stare, but on the inside he couldn't help feel jealous. He had never been worried about unless it was a villager worrying whether or not he was going to snap and them all. He had never been hugged like that by his mother. Hell, he didn't even know who his mother was. He never had any family who ever really cared for him. Mana, Daibo, can't, breath, Naruto gasped out. Minami let go of him and turned her attention to the other hospitalized ninja with a hard glare. So you're the one who put Naruto into the hospital, huh? Well, I'm going to fix you right for that. Minami growled as she began pulling up her sleeves and advancing on Eshiku. A large man with spiky white hair stepped in front of her. Now Minami, please calm down. Shujiki said as he held his wife down. Shu-chan, what are you doing here? Naruto shouted, getting slightly confused. Well, obviously I'm here because I heard the three of you landed yourselves in a hospital bed. Shujiki gave his godson a stern look. Naruto rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Who kicked the door down? Hey, he's awake. Kankuro shouted as he walked into the room with a case that had a picture of a steaming hot bowl of ramen on the side. Seeing the case and smelling the sweet aroma of what was inside, Naruto's belly growled, and only then did he realize how hungry he really was. Gathering his chakra, Naruto Keisutepued from his bed to Kankuro grabbed the bowl of ramen inside the case and went back to his bed the same way. He began slurping the noodles into his mouth with almost a vacuum-like fashion until he had finished the bowl. Nice to see you too, Kankuro muttered sarcastically, throwing the paper box container away. Naruto scratched the back of his head sheepishly again. Sorry Kankuro, I was hungry. When aren't you? Kankuro muttered as he slumped down into a chair by his bed. Before Naruto could make a comeback, he felt a pair of arms wrap around his neck and a certain some things pressing against his back. It's about time you woke up, Baka, I missed you. Tamari said into his ear. Naruto turned in his bed and gave her a kiss, but in his awkward position he lost his balance and fell back, bringing Tamari down on top of him. They both blushed as they began to realize how they were positioned. Naruto-kun, Aimi shouted happily as she entered the room, followed by Kurisu, Haku, Kiba, Keiko and Mato. What are you doing? Aimi asked, blinking several times. Everyone in the room turned an ominous shade of red, besides Kiba, who was giving him a thumbs up, Shujiki, who was just grinning like a fool at his godson while howling in pain when his wife grabbed his ear and began to pinch it unmercifully, and Kankuro was pretending to gag in a trash can. Tamari immediately got up off of Naruto, blushing even fiercer. Elsewhere, Sakura sighed as she leaned against the railing of her hotel room balcony. She looked up to the partly cloudy sky. Smack. She cringed, the sound of her slapping him still echoed in her mind. I hate you, you damn dirty demon. She bit back a small sob. Because of her own selfish feelings, she had lost one of her best friends, most likely her best friend. All week she had been trying to get into the hospital to see him, but he was still asleep. She would have liked to give him some flowers, but the other boy in the room would always glare at her whenever she came by. She wiped away a small tear from her eye. She looked up at the sky with determination. As he wasn't awake when she got there, then she was going to stay there, creepy one-eyed boy or not, and wait till he got up. She walked back into her room, grabbed her headband and closed the door behind her. Going to see the Dobi again? Sakura turned to the voice. There, sprawled on the couch, was a bandaged up Sasuke. Ever since the night they had failed the Chunin exam, he had been doing some very hard training, even coming back with broken bones on some nights. What do you care? She snapped at him. Sai looked up from his notepad at the raised voice. He shrugged and returned to his drawing. Sakura slammed the hotel room door shut as she left, making everything in the room shake. Sai caught his bottle of ink before it hit the ground and set it back onto the table as if nothing had happened and dipped his brush in it again. Kumogakure Anbu headquarters. Yugito stood at attention in front of her commanding officer. The room was relatively small, poorly lit and with only 2 chairs and a small desk. You have an objective update for Operation White Eye, Ni-san. The Anbu in the crow mask said, handing her sheet of paper. The piece of paper had the picture of a Hyuga boy on it. He was wearing his headband on his forehead, a tan shirt and brown pants. The rest of the paper had his skill level, previous missions and basic background. Neji Hyuga. Yugito read the name aloud. That's right. The original target, one Hinata Hyuga, failed the second Chunin exam test, so the only choices left are the two side branch boys. Neji is the stronger of the two, however I doubt he could defeat you in combat. Yugito finished reading Neji's paper and looked slightly impressed. It took a lot to impress her. Well, when you had 2 kgs worth of chakra in your gut, it would take a lot to impress. What are my orders, Crow-san? Your orders are to defeat him in the Chunin exam, when he is recovering in the hospital. Oh, and make sure you leave his lower half intact. You enter his hospital room and take him back to Anbu headquarters. What happens when the doctors find out he's gone? Yugito asked. Anime and manga. An Anbu agent who is an expert in henge will take his place. After the agent and Neji Hyuga's his team leave the village, the agent will put on a show telling them that he is going to leave Konohagakure to get away from the Hyuga clan to have a free life. After the agent loses his team, he will return to the village. Yugito nodded her head in understanding. She stood up and bowed to Crow, who gave a respectful nod to her. As she turned to leave, the Anbu spoke up again. Oh, and make sure you don't screw this up. Jinchuriki or not, you will be punished by death if you fail. That is the order of the Raikage. He paused a bit. Please complete the mission. I'd hate to have to execute my favorite student. Yugito simply smiled at the masked man and left the room. Once she left the room, a shadow hung over her. She looked up into the face of Uchida Tokichi, head ninja. Jinchuriki, I have another order for you. The man held out a picture of a boy. This is Takaru Momiji, formerly of Kumogakure, now of Sunagakure. Him if you fight him in the Chunin exam. He is the son of the previous head ninja who failed to get the Byakugan from Konoha. She took the picture and shoved it into her shuriken pouch. Whatever, I'll get him if I get the chance. The older man glared at her but said nothing as he turned around and disappeared. She sighed. I really hate that man, Yugito thought irritably as she reached the entrance of the Anbu building. Thanks to the Nibi, she didn't have to worry about sudden changes in light as her eyes quickly adjust. So what shall we do today? Nibi suddenly chimed in. Well, I don't know. What do you want to do? I was thinking we could train for tomorrow and maybe you can finally teach me that technique you keep putting off teaching me. Yugito thought as she walked through the busy afternoon streets of Kumo. The weather was partly cloudy at the moment, with a bit of sunshine breaking through. Well, I was thinking we could go look for your mate. He's sure to be out of the hospital by now. Yugito blushed slightly. First off, it's hospital, not hospital. And second, he's not my mate. Not yet at least. She thought the last part quiet enough for Nibi not to hear. Oh, but you want him, don't you? Don't answer. I know you do. I mean, what else could explain that you dream you had about you two last night? Yugito's blush grew several shades darker. You never told me you could see my dreams. Yugito shouted in her mind. You never asked, dear. Nibi began snickering as she felt her tenant's anger rise a few notches. Kumogakure Hospital. He's already been released? Sakura asked, disappointed. The nurse smiled at her. Don't worry. He only got out about an hour ago. I'm sure you could find him. Sakura smiled and thanked the nurse before running out of the hospital lobby. Ichiraku Ramen Stand. Kumogakure Division. Old mam to see never mold me he mad a win broder. Old man Tuki never told me he had a twin brother. Naruto shouted with a fistful of noodles in his mouth. He started tearing up. Are you alright? Tuki's older brother, Deuki, asked, worried that he was choking. Naruto swallowed his noodles and sighed, anime tears still falling. No, it's just, I haven't had the delicious noodles of Ichiraku in almost 5 months. I miss them so. Tamari sighed and rolled her eyes at him. He looked up from his bowl with a noodle hanging from his mouth. Anime and manga. Wah? He asked. She smiled at him before leaning in and kissing him on the lips, taking the loose noodle into her mouth and letting it hang from her mouth before slurping it up. Naruto blushed slightly before smiling at her. He grabbed a bunch of noodles with his chopsticks and fed her. After their meal, the two went their separate ways. Tamari to go take a nap because she had been training all day the previous day and needed some rest for the next day, and Naruto to train and get ready for tomorrow. Naruto was dressed in a black t-shirt with orange cargo shorts and his headband tied around his neck. What should I work on first? Chakra control, ninjutsu, kenjutsu, or the K's Sudapue? I think you should be working on getting more mates. The Kyuubi chuckled from inside his cage. What are you talking about? I already have Tamari-chan. Sigh. Yes, I know you have the sand girl, but there are other girls out there for you to take, if you know what I mean, and besides, the more mates, the better. Just shut up, you baka. Naruto shouted, causing people around to step away from him, giving him funny looks. Oh, Naruto-san. Naruto turned around at the sound of his name and stood face to face with Yugito ni. Oh, hi Yugito-san. How are you? Naruto said, scratching the back of his head. He had a small, almost invisible blush on his face. I'm good, thank you for asking. Gosh, she looks pretty, Naruto thought offhandedly. She was dressed in a light purple kimono, with darker purple flames around the bottom of the dress. She had her pale blonde hair down. Her light green cat-like eyes shined in the afternoon sun. Naruto mentally slapped himself. Remember, Tamari-chan would kick you if you tried anything she wouldn't like. He could hear the Kyuubi's dark chuckling inside his head. See, you're already liking the idea of more than one mate. Naruto closed the mental link between the two. The last thing he needed was Kyuubi brainwashing him to be a womanizer. Anyway, Yugito started. I was wondering, I still feel bad for making you spill on your shirt the day before and for the fight with your teammate. So I was wondering if I could maybe take you out to eat to make up for it. So what do you say? Naruto gulped slightly. If Tamari found out, he was sure he'd be a dead man. But if her got to tell her that she was just treating him to make up the accident before she tore down the place, maybe he could get out with only a few bruises. I don't know, my girlfriend Tamari might not like it. He scratched the back of his sheepishly. He has a girlfriend. Yugito suddenly felt depressed. Don't worry, dear. Just because he has a girlfriend, doesn't mean that's the only one he's ever allowed to have. Who knows, he might find you more likably than his current girlfriend. Yugito brightened up. Nibby was so right. She would prove to him that she was more deserving of his love than the four pony-tailed haired girl. She looked down at the ground as if she were depressed and then suddenly jerked her head up with the best puppy dog pout she could muster. Oh please, Naruto-san. It would mean so much to me. And I promise not to tell your girlfriend. So will you? Alright. She squealed with delight, before grabbing onto his left arm and dragging him off. Kumogakure Hospital. Iwado slowly moved out of his bed. He was very sore at the moment, but he was certain he would be fine for tomorrow. The nurse begged for him to stay in bed, but he simply ignored her and left the room with a cane in his left arm. After navigating around the hospital for a while, he found himself at the door to the roof. Leaning up against the door was a hooded man. So, have you delivered the message? The white-haired man asked. Iwado bowed his head to the hooded man. Hi, Yakushi-san. The Uchiha knows what to do. Kabuto smirked. He pushed his glasses up back onto the bridge of his nose. Very good, Iwado-san. You've done very well for your short time under Orochimaru-sama. I'm sure he'll award you greatly if this succeeds. Anyway, how are you doing? Need some healing? Iwado took a cig from his hospital smock and lit it with a small fire jutsu. The doctors here are pretty good, but nothing compared to you, and I'll need to be in my best condition tomorrow. Kabuto smiled at the older man. Iwado is 22 and Kabuto's is like 19. As he walked over to him and began healing the wound on his chest. So how was Sasuke-kun? Iwado blew a cloud of smoke through his nostrils before he answered. He was able to take me and my team on single-handedly and survive. But I'm sure if we weren't supposed to keep him alive we could have him. Kabuto nodded as he finished his healing. There, all done. Well, Jane Iwato-san, have fun at the Chunin exam. Kabuto smiled before disappearing from view. 8 p.m. Outside of Mashi's Sushi's bar. Ah, that was really nice. Naruto said, patting his stomach, with a satisfied look on his. Yugito smiled at him. She hooked her arm with his and smiled even wider at him. Naruto blushed slightly from the close contact. Anime and manga. I'm glad you enjoyed yourself. Now be a gentleman and walk me home, please. Naruto smiled at her and the two walked off. So tell me about yourself, Naruto-ku. I mean San. Yugito laughed nervously. Well, what do you want to know? Yugito put a finger to her lips as she thought about. Naruto couldn't help but think she looked adorable. How about your home life? If that's not too personal, of course. Naruto waved it off. No, of course not. Well, let's see. I live with my godfather and godmother with their clan, the Ryu clan. I love to train and hang out with my teammates. I used to live in Sunagakure, but I moved to Suna to live with my godparents. I have 3 siblings, well, kind of, they're my godparents' children. Kurisu, who's the oldest and is very much how I imagine what having a real older brother would be like. He helps me with my training when my godfather can't, and he's a really cool guy. Then there's Aimi, she's a bit of a dork but I love her a lot, and then my little brother Mato, he loves to read and study history. He keeps telling us how he's going to be the first ninja historian and travel the world learning about other cultures and their history. So what about you? Well, how could she compete with that? She had no family at all, at least none that she knew about. Well, I live by myself. I have no living family as far as I know, and I was alone for much of my childhood. But my teammates are like my brothers. Kai is like my cool older brother who gives me guidance when I need it, and Ryuto is my goofy little brother who I can always count on to make me laugh when I need it. That's about it. Naruto could sympathize with her. The two of them had so much in common, if only he knew. Both of them had been alone for a long time until some special people came into their life and made it worth living. He smiled at her fondly. She noticed this and began to blush. Oh, here's my place. Yuget suddenly piped up. She walked up to the entrance to the door with Naruto behind her. Well, Naruto-san, I'm glad you could spend the afternoon with me. I hope we can do it again sometime soon. Naruto smiled at her. Why did he feel like he knew her? Like the two had some kind of special bond. He didn't know. He'd maybe ask the Kyuubi about it later. As he was thinking, he didn't notice Yugito close in on him, and it was too late. Yugito gave him a quick peck on the cheek. His blush grew, but it was hard to tell since it was late. Yugito waved goodbye, as she slid into her apartment. See, that wasn't so hard. Nibasada's Yugito danced about in her apartment in complete bliss. You may or may not remember me. I am Snake, proctor of this exam. The blue-haired man said to the group of genin. Now, he continued, this isn't the real final exam. Since there's so many of you, we have to hold preliminary rounds so only the best of the best can go on to the finals, for the enjoyment of the villagers and the lords who will be attending. Now here's how we're going to do this. That hunk of shit on the wall, Snake pointed to the computer on the wall. We'll randomly select names for each of the matches. Each match will be a one-on-one no bars hold battle. First to die, give up or get knocked out loses. The man clasped his hands together. Now let's see which of you two babies goes first. The machine began to speed through each of the names before landing on 2. Iwato versus Mario. Alright, anyone whose name isn't up there, then get your up onto the balcony. The rest of the ninja began making their way up to the stands. Ray turned her head as she did. Good luck. She sweat dropped after thinking that though, because down in the arena Mario was doing some kind of jig, bouncing on one foot for a few seconds before switching to the other with a happy smile on his face. Yay. Mario is so lucky. Mario doesn't have to wait to fight. Mario doesn't have to wait to fight. Yes, Mario is so lucky. And Mario is going to win. Yes, he is. Mario is so lucky. Iwato simply lit up another cig and put it to his lips. You sure are a confident one. Mario stopped his little dance and gave the older man a kind of crazy smile. Of course Mario is confident. Mario is going to win. Iwato just chuckled. We'll see. All right, Snake began as he stood by the two ninja with his hand raised. I Snake, Jonin of Kumogakure, officially begin the Chunin preliminaries. Begin, Snake said as he brought his hand and jumped back from the two genin. Mario drew both of his broadswords from their sheaths and swung them at Iwato with a vertical slash. The Oto Nin grabbed his coffin of his back and blocked the attack. He grunted from the force of the swings. He hadn't been expecting such a scrawny kid to have such power, but he smirked. He had the upper hand, in experience. Mario jumped into the air and began spinning as he fell and slammed the sword in his right hand onto Iwato's coffin. Iwato grunted again from the force. Mario smiled like a maniac the whole time. He brought both of his swords up under Iwato and knocked the coffin from his grasp. Iwato cursed as he did back flips to get away from getting sliced into bits. He made a hand sign as he finally stopped. Mario jumped at him again, laughing insanely. A katana made out of bone flew into Iwato's hands and he blocked Mario's attack. Relentlessly, Mario began bringing his swords down on top of Iwato, each feeling like getting hit by a cinder block. Iwato grunted in pain. His wound on his chest had opened back up again and he was losing blood. I've got to end this. Mario jumped into the air as Iwato's coffin came flying at him from behind. Said man caught the coffin with one hand, put the katana back inside and charged at Mario. You've got strength, kid, but Iwato swung his coffin and Mario jumped back to avoid getting hit. I've got more. He slammed the coffin into the ground and began making hand signs. As he finished the last hand sign, the coffin slowly began to creak open. After it had opened all the way, Iwato slumped to the ground unconscious. Snake was about to call the match over, but there was something in the coffin moving. A bony hand grabbed onto the edge of the coffin and helped pull itself out. A collected gasp covered the area. Standing there at the entrance to the coffin was a 7-foot-tall skeleton. It was dressed in a gray battle armor that had a likeness to the Shodai Hokage's armor. The armor also had the symbol of Iwa on its shoulder pads. A dark rattling chuckle filled the air. Suddenly blue lines began running all over the inside of the skeleton as if to mimic the human chakra network. What in the world is that? Naruto said, staring at the walking dead. That is the skeletal remains of the Naitami Tsuchikage. And Iwato is using a jutsu that allows him to possess the undead figure. Naruto turned to the voice. Standing there was a regal-looking boy with his hair in dreadlocks. Who are you? Naruto asked, narrowing his eyes at the Oto Nin. I am Kazoku Kinzoku and I am Iwato's teammate. The tall boy narrowed his eyes right back at Naruto. So how in the hell did this guy break into Akage's tomb? I'm pretty sure they'd be pretty well guarded and very hard to get into. Kankuro said from Naruto's right. Kazoku sighed. Iwato is the blood relation to the Naitami Tsuchikage. He was his great-granduncle. When the Naitami died, he made his tomb so only his blood relatives could enter unharmed. So it was easy for Iwato to steal his great-granduncle's body. Okay, Naruto started. We found out how he got it, but why? Why did he steal it? Sure, he looks like he was a pretty big guy when he was alive, but is that it? Kazoku looked to the arena. When the Naitami was alive, never, in his ninja career, did he ever once break a bone. The group that was listening in eyes widened. He was known as Hito Mat Teko Kashi, man with steel bones. The dark chuckling filled the area again. Thanks for the history lesson, Kazoku. Now, Iwato reared back his left fist and chakra began to gather. After the apparent chakra was needed, he thrust his hand forward. His hand disconnected from his body and shot at Mario with a string of chakra attaching it to the rest of the skeleton. Mario couldn't move out of the way in time, so he brought up both of his swords to block the attack. The bone hand crashed into the swords, knocking him back all the way to the other side of the arena and slamming into the wall. Ray gasped in shock while Eshiku only furrowed his brow. The hand detached from the wall and reconnected to the walking dead man. That, a voice sounded from inside the crater in the wall. Hurt Mario, said boy crawled out from the hole. He was visibly shaking, but it didn't look like he was about to fall. His shirt was covered in holes and dirt. His eyes were dead, focused on the walking corpse, an insane, feral grin plastered on his face. The dead one tried to take them from me, didn't he? I know he did. I know he did, so don't lie to Mario. Mario knows you tried to take them from me. Yes, he does, so Mario is going to make you pay in the most horrible ways. Yes, Mario is going to you in the most horrible he can think of. The boy was shaking violently, his grip on both of the swords so tight his hands were pale white and small bits of blood were dripping through his hands. Mario will the dead one. He dashed forward like a madman at Iwado. The breathless chuckle filled the room again as Iwado waited for Mario to get closer. The dual-eye-colored boy jumped into the air, bringing both sword down on top of the skeleton. Iwado lazily brought his right arm up to block the attack. The sword slammed into the bone arm. Wah! What? Iwado shouted. Both of the swords had dug at least an inch into the skeletal arm. The bone-wielding ninja shot his head up at the teal blue-haired boy. Iwado grunted in pain. Blood slowly began to drip from his arm on his real body. What are you? Mario was shaking all over. Don't try to fool Mario. Tears began to fall from his eyes. The dead one tried to take them from me. He tried to take Mario's brother and sister from him. Why? Mario has already lost them once. Why try and take them from him again? The distraught boy pushed harder on the swords, making them sink just a bit more into the arm. Iwado jumped away from the sword-wielding ninja. What the hell is he talking about? Who's his brother and sister? Tamari asked. Eshiku grunted as he leaned up against the wall. When Mario was a fresh genin, he and his family went on a vacation to celebrate his first full year as a ninja. Back then he didn't talk in third person, he wasn't half crazy. He was a normal everyday boy who was making his way in the world. His dad was a chunin and mother was a 10-year retired jonin. He had twin siblings, Kashiro and Miko. On their return trip, they were attacked by a group of bandits led by a jonin missing nin. Mario and his dad tried to fend them off, but there was too many of them. His dad was the first to die. Mario was gagged and tied up and forced to watch as the bandits did unforgivable things to his mother and 5-year-old sister. Some of the people listening furrowed their brows, getting what he meant, while others slightly cried. And then his little brother, Kashiro, was beaten later in front of him and almosted. And for some cruel reason they left Mario alive. He was so distraught and mentally scared that he was able to unlock a hidden chakra well inside him he never knew about. He ripped of the ropes and walked over to one of the fallen bandits and took his 2 broad swords. Before his mother had retired, she was an expert in seals, so she was able to teach her son all she could about them. In fact, Eshiku grabbed the end of his shirt to reveal his stomach where a weird seal was on his chest. She was the one who sealed, you know what, Naruto, inside of me. Questioning looks covered the group except for Naruto, who got what he meant. Anyway, somehow he was able to create a seal that put the souls of his little brother and sister into the swords, since both were still alive but were so near death there was no way he could help them. When he returned to the village he was half mad, drenched in blood and holding both swords to his chest. I've never been able to get past that part, but I'm sure the blood was from the bandits. I don't know what the hell you're talking about, but you're dead, you psycho. Hone to Mirai. Bone funeral. Iwado shouted. Spikes made of bone shot up all over the ground around Mario and he was lost from view. Blood slowly dripped from small places in the bone pyramid. Mario. Ray shouted. You had better get out of that thing or I'll never forgive you. You hear me? You'll be so sorry if you don't. Tears began running down her face. Mario, she sobbed weakly. Serves that piece of trash right, Iwato chuckled. Pound. What the? A small crack appeared on the bones. Pound, 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 pound. Mario came crashing out of the bones. His left arm was covered in blood, he had a large gash across his chest and one of his eyes had been pierced. Iwato was shocked. No one had ever broke out of that jutsu. It was too late, the crazed boy had cleared the gap between the two in under a second, he didn't even have enough time to release the jutsu. Mario swung both swords in a crisscross move, cutting the skeleton head in half. Iwato's real head split into an X shape and his body dropped to the ground. Both of Mario's swords snapped in half and he fell to the ground. Mario looked up to the ceiling. He smiled lightly. The ghostly figure of his brother and his sister stood there smiling down at him. Brooder, what are you doing? Miko asked, smiling at him. Yay, big brooder, you can't die here. We want you to grow up big and happy. Kashiro said, poking his brother in the forehead. We have to go now, brooder. But we'll see you later. Slowly the two spirits started to fade. No. No, don't leave, Mario. He tried to reach for them but it was too late. They had gone. Snake ran to Mario and checked his pulse. Alright, the winner of this match is Mario of Kusagakure. Now get some medic nin in here now. After they had taken Mario to the hospital wing of the arena and cleared the corpse of Iwato, Snake returned to the middle of the arena. With round 1 finished, we shall move on. The machine on the wall came to life and began running through names. REI versus I'm IIRYUU. As both girls made their way to the arena floor, Kazoku looked over to Akiko. She was visibly shaking and tears were coming down from her eyes. Even though it wasn't his nature, he put a hand on her shoulder. I know you had feelings for him, but he was a ninja and he died with honor and for Orochimaru-sama. Akiko grabbed Kazoku's hand and held it for a bit. She didn't know why he was comforting her, but she was glad for it. Both girls stood across from each other, Rei with a neutral stare and Aimi with a big goofy grin. Yay. I'm so happy. I finally get to show off my stuff in front of Naruto-kun. Yay. Rei smiled slightly at her. Well, let's hope you impress your Naruto-kun. May the best girl win. Yes. Let's go, blue-haired Proctor. Start the match already. Snake growled slightly but brought his hand up anyway and then swung it down. Begin. Both girls reached into their shuriken pouches, grabbed a set of shuriken or kunai and launched them at the other. Most of Rei's ninja tools blocked Aimi's, but the ones that didn't were easily caught and then thrown back at Aimi. Aimi shrieked in surprise and slammed her palms to the ground, creating a wall of ice in front of her, blocking the attack. Rei looked amused. Nice move, she said dryly. You did that without any hand signs, impressive. Aimi started scratching the back of her head sheepishly, which looked funny through the ice wall. Actually, since the ice affinity chakra is so rare, I have a hard time controlling it, and sometimes when I'm scared or in deep trouble. Bam! I just use an ice jutsu. Aimi finished. Well, whether you did it on purpose or not, I'm afraid I'm going to have to